The Aldis podcast is brought to you by Aldis International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe. Today, you are listening to our AI in Action series, where leading minds in AI from across the world share their story, success, and advice. AI in Action cuts through the hype and explores the true impact of artificial intelligence in our world today.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Robert Dwyer. Robert is the Chief Data Scientist for Certilytics. Robert, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Robert, we've obviously had you on the show previously, but for our audience members listening who maybe didn't catch the original episode, could you give us a bit of a summary again of your background in technology, from where you got started, some of the roles you've held along the way, and take us up to today as the Chief Data Scientist at Certilytics?
Absolutely. So I got I think a pretty indirect start. I would trace my beginnings back to graduate school, where I entered a classic genetics laboratory for my PhD. And we were set apart by not doing anything that hadn't already been invented in terms of techniques by like 1975, say. So very old school. Got really interested in some of the computational methods and was able to start a computational project with some adjunct biology professors who were, say, cross-listed in physics, and learned to code in Python just through that process. Turned into an interesting project, got several publications out of that, ended up being the majority of my thesis. And so that's how I got into programming and computational methods. And toward the end, really started digging into machine learning, knowing that's the direction that I wanted to head. And then when I graduated, I was fortunate enough to get a job at Certilytics as an entry-level data scientist when the company was small, say 20 people, and just really grow with the company. My skill set grew with the company as we had new needs, and eventually ended up making my way toward this leadership position. So now we have as many folks on the data science team as we did in the company when I started. So it's been a really exciting process, but really got into it just by virtue of feeling like that kind of computational urge when I was doing an otherwise very different type of project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's something we can talk about in a bit of detail later in the conversation, that the explosion of computational sciences utilizing data science over the past few years has been very exciting. But for you, you were an early adopter trying to find your way, and obviously it's worked out. So yeah, jumping into where you are now, Chief Data Scientist at Certilytics. Tell us all about Certilytics, who you are, what you do, mission of the business.
Absolutely. So we're a healthcare analytics company, to put it as broadly as possible. We really offer data science, data analytics as a service. So you send us your healthcare data, claims, electronic health records, whatever you've got in any form. We'll standardize it, integrate it, aggregate it, and host it in a cloud service where then you can access the cleansed and validated version of that. And then we have a whole suite of products on top of that that provide insight for all different sorts of use cases and pain points. So everything from just basic quality reporting to machine learning driven patient outreach for population health management. And then, as I think we'll talk about more on this episode, we're starting to really get into a space of validating the efficacy of some of the other solutions and tools that are in the market, particularly in that pop health management space.
Well, let's jump right into that, because you and I were talking about it off air. Some of the new advancements in the space is creating a lot of hype, a lot of interest, and a lot of new organizations popping up offering services. And what Certilytics have started to do is help these hospitals and health systems assess, you know, who's good, who's bad, what value are you getting from it. So talk to us about that, because I know that's not something that you were doing a few years ago when we first had you on the show. So it'd be great to hear the origins of that, where the requests come from, and what you've been able to do for your customers.
Sure. I mean, the origins were really being asked to prove our own value for key clients, right? Where we are providing these analytics, they're helping pop health management vendors reach out to and prioritize outreach to their own populations. And so what is the value add of that analytics? And by virtue of looking at that, we're also looking at what is the value of the particular intervention that's being offered. So if it's a diabetes management program with, say, an application, what is the actual effect of interaction with that application on specific health outcomes for members or on overall cost? And so we really started as just proving our own value proposition and trying to do it as scientifically as we could. And that led us into this space of causal modeling, propensity modeling, using what are retrospective data sets that were really not gathered for the purpose of making unbiased estimates of treatment effects and figuring out methodologically how can we get the best estimate out of that. You know, the gold standard, of course, is like a randomized controlled trial like you would do for a study on drug efficacy. That's often not done in pop health management. How can we do our best to get an equivalent, robust, valuable estimate from the data that we do have? And so that's led us into a lot of new methodologies and really a whole new, I think, area of business, which is turning those tools outward for those same clients. Said, okay, you've done this for yourselves. Can you do this for our other vendors? And so I think part of the value of this is the explosion, as you alluded to, of these sort of vendor point solutions in healthcare, right? People who make applications for behavioral health or adherence. There are lots of specific actual devices out there, right? Whole companies that are predicated around smart devices, improving care and particularly members' engagement with care. And so if you go to a big conference like HIMSS or Health, there are a huge number of these vendors on the floor now. And for the most part, their value props are supported by kind of indirect arguments from the literature, right? Of course, managing your blood glucose levels or your HbA1c readings is known to improve health for diabetics. There'll be maybe a small in-house study saying, hey, our tools increase engagement and readings by X%, therefore we're driving Y ROI. And so what we're doing is really coming in after a program's been implemented for a couple years and using the data to really say systematically and fairly across vendors, what is the actual ROI that we can measure using these causal modeling and other methods?
What impact has that then had to your role, your team, and the day to day? Because you obviously had a suite of services prior to introducing this based on market opportunity and demand. So, how has your team grown and evolved over the past 2 years? And give us a look behind the scenes now from the number of people involved, the various positions, and what it's like day to day.
Sure. So I would say before we really focused on machine learning and deep learning and hiring data scientists who had experience in both. And then this has really caused us to build out, I think, a new group, within the team, which is, I would say, probably best characterized by econometrics. So these are folks who have maybe an economics background or a statistics background, but who are used to leveraging these kinds of methodologies. And in some ways, it's like we evolved initially from statisticians to those with deep learning expertise to now, in a way, back to some of the frequentist and other statistical kind of expertise that maybe we had deviated from. So that's been an interesting kind of full circle evolution there. But really just hiring specifically for people who have this expertise has really allowed us to deepen our expertise and our knowledge and our tool set in this space.
You are listening to the Aldis podcast. When you're looking to scale your team, or if you are interested in showcasing your company in a future episode, reach out today. Or if you're in the market for a new role, visit our website to view open positions, www.aldis.com.
Robert, when you look at the recent developments that Certilytics have made in assessment of other third-party vendors and their suite of services for these health systems, what knock-on implications do you think this could have to the industry as a whole from either a positive or negative, just overall changing the landscape?
I think there's going to be a kind of coalescing of a few different phenomena right now in this sort of healthcare machine learning space. So one is what I've touched on, this notion of evaluating efficacy and ROI associated with specific programs. I think also, a very high priority in the market right now is understanding model bias, making sure that the models that are out there generating scores in production as part of business and care processes are fair and are working in a way that is transparent enough that stakeholders can be confident in the results. And then the third is just with I think the proliferation of machine learning in healthcare is just developing standards beyond this question of bias, just how accurate do these models need to be? Is accuracy being tested the same way across different use cases? How are these models degrading over time, being replaced, that sort of thing. So I think all of these really speak to a broader push that we see coming towards standardization of validation practices. And I think really at the center of that is going to be third-party validation of machine learning models, the business processes built around those, a data pipeline built around those. And then ultimately, getting back to this notion of ROI is the overall effect of those processes, not just on, financials, but also on specific clinical outcomes, improved adherence, et cetera. And so I think we'll start to see companies offering products that are really geared at that kind of holistic analysis of the effect of machine learning and analytics and interventions in the market and on patients.
Which will obviously be great for Certilytics because it sounds like you guys have been innovative in this space and might be one of the first to offer this types of third-party independent assessment. Looking ahead now, Robert, for your team and Certilytics as a whole, when you look at the current landscape of the health tech healthcare market and its use of AI and machine learning, what are you most excited about for the next 1 to 2 years as you continue on this journey with Certilytics? And what are you excited to see being further adopted in the space?
Absolutely. I think some of the foundational models that we're seeing in popular culture today, right? The chat bots and some of the computer vision and generative models are really going to pave the way for adoption of similar generative models in healthcare. Things like data generation, I think will be really big, and it'll be a way to help, I think, democratize the healthcare space because potentially you can get around some of these thornier questions of data use and privacy if you're using truly synthetic data. So I think that's a really exciting area that will really open a lot of healthcare analytics up to more disruption as data become cheaper and easier to share, and you can have more third parties entering small companies, startups with very focused value propositions. So I think that's going to be really big. I certainly am excited as we talked about this notion of broadly of validation and really starting to put, I would say, market-wide standards in place. If you think of something like, I always draw the analogy to data security, you have high trust and other types of certifications. And I think that ultimately is probably the way that the market goes in healthcare analytics as well. So I think deep learning, more integrated. So really bringing about this promise of personalized medicine, integrating genomic data with claims data, with electronic health record data, social determinants data. There's been a lot of talk about that, but the data still remains pretty balkanized, pretty hard to join together and get all the data owners on board. So I think continuing to push in that direction and provide that more integrated data view will help feed deeper and more interesting models as well. So I think we're really starting to see the landscape that everything is evolving toward, but there's still a lot of work to do to get there, obviously.
Final question from me then, Robert. I always try to bring it back to the impact and opportunity for people who are interested in what they're hearing. So as Certilytics continues to evolve its business offering and we see an increased demand for this third-party validation of plug-in services, that's obviously going to have an impact to your group because you do a lot of that work. When you look at the roadmap and particularly the next 2 years, if Certilytics are to continue to be as successful as you've been, that's going to have an impact on headcount. So what opportunities do you see for people to potentially come and join Certilytics in the next 1 to 2 years? What types of positions do you anticipate needing to hire for? And part three of it is when you're speaking to candidates, what do you tell them about Certilytics that gets them excited enough to join you guys over some of the other great companies hiring?
I think we'll certainly be hiring in the econometrics area and continue to grow that expertise. We're still investing a lot in traditional machine learning and deep learning. We do still often find that for a lot of applications, constructed linear model gets you 99% of the way there with a lot less headache. So I think we'll continue to grow that, kind of traditional machine learning space. I think where we are finding deep learning to be particularly valuable is in some of these deep representation, synthetic data type areas where what the entity that you're modeling, say like a medical claim or a medical record, is really, really complex, really nonlinear, lots of interdependencies among data points. So we will continue to push in that direction. And I think there's a lot of value there. MLOps is obviously kind of a buzzword and I think a hot topic, but one with a lot of value as one tries to build out real-time models that scale effectively, that are kind of cloud server agnostic. So there's a lot, I think, of hype around MLOps, but I think that continues to be a really unique skill set and one that is important to hire for in this space. And then the last thing I'll say in healthcare is always made more complex by its data. Healthcare data are pretty balkanized. It's often messy. It requires a lot of arcane knowledge to be able to manipulate and pull valuable features out of healthcare data and know that one's doing it well and doing it in a way that will work across clients and data sources. So I think really focusing on that expertise to hire healthcare data subject matter experts. I think in some ways, hiring someone who with those skills and then teaching them the basics of machine learning is maybe a viable route versus alternative.
Robert, thank you so much for coming back on the show. It's great to be at the stage we're at now and doing the podcast for so many years where we can have return guests who can share what's happened over the past few years. And in cases like Certilytics, share your success, share your growth, and share the new advancements in the industry. It's always great to hear about what's coming down the pipeline. So then hope when we have you back on the show again, we can hear about how far towards it you've got. And Certilytics as a business continuing to be very successful and a lot of opportunities for people to potentially join you and help you along this mission. So thanks again for coming on. We wish you the best of luck in the year or two ahead and look forward to having you back on the show again in the near future.
Wonderful. I always enjoy coming on and I appreciate the time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Aldous Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.aldous.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.